At a dusk-lit feast, my uncle smirked. She may dream of thrones, but she will never shape a crown. I bowed low, let them feast. Centuries later, when the kingdoms they knew turned to ash, it was my banner that flew over new worlds not through force, but through memory, law, and the sheer immortality of dreams that refused to die. I was 15 the night my uncle humiliated me in front of the entire family. The feast was supposed to be a celebration, something about a trade victory, or maybe a new political deal signed with one of the border states. I don't even remember. What I do remember is the hall. Long oak tables stacked with heavy platters of food, candles dripping wax into gold bowls, and that sharp smell of roasted meat clinging to everything. Everyone was there. Lords from across the northern regions, distant cousins from the coast, military men with loud voices, and even louder laughter. And then there was me, just the only daughter of a middling noble line. My father drank too much, my mother only smiled when someone important looked her way, and I knew even then I was just scenery to most of them. But I had dreams. Not the kind you whisper to your mother. Real ones. I wanted to build something that would last. Not just rule, I wanted to change the way things worked. To write the laws. To guide more than a single banner or castle. I wanted to reshape the world they kept telling me I was too small to touch. That night, I said something at the table. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even meant to be bold. One of my cousins was bragging about how he'd be commanding a garrison by the time he turned 21. I said, well, if the realm is wise, perhaps by then we'll stop handing power to anyone just because they're born into it. The table got quiet for a second. And then Uncle Richard, sitting at the head like he was already king of something, put down his knife. He smirked. Everyone watched him because he always made himself the star. He looked at my father and said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. She may dream of thrones, but she will never shape a crown. Some of them laughed. A few looked away. My father laughed the hardest, like it was just a joke. My mother gave me that tight look she used when I embarrassed her. Like I'd forgotten my place again. I didn't say a word. I stood, bowed my head, and walked out. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I walked through the courtyard and sat on the cold stone steps leading to the east garden. I picked up a chunk of broken marble and held it so hard it sliced my hand open. That was the moment. Not the insult. The silence afterward. The way no one stood up. No one said I mattered. That was the seed of it all. I made myself a promise right there, bleeding onto old stone. They would forget his words, but they would never forget me. I didn't have an army. I didn't have power. All I had was time, and I used every second. I left home 2 months after that. No one stopped me. My father was too drunk, my mother too busy managing the household. I forged a travel order under his seal and joined a merchant convoy headed toward the southern cities. In the beginning, I cleaned floors and carried ledgers. I slept in stables. I kept my ears open. Learned what mattered to the people who actually made the kingdoms run, not just the royals and the lords, but the dock workers, the tax scribes, the judges, the traders. I studied contracts. I listened to lawsuits. I took notes when land disputes were settled in court instead of with swords. While my cousins played war games, I learned how the real world worked. Over the years, I built something. Not a throne. Not a crown. A network. It started small, just trade agreements I wrote for farmers who couldn't read. I helped towns settle border arguments without needing the local barons. People started calling me for advice. Then paying me. Then trusting me to manage things that nobody else could. By the time I was 30, I had more influence in 3 regions than most dukes had in their own estates. Not through war. Through memory, law, and patience. My uncle died when I was 35. Fell from a horse drunk. I didn't go to the funeral. By then, the northern realms were already falling apart. Famine. Drought.
Corruption.
While the nobles fought over titles, the people came to me. I helped them reorganize, rebuild, reform. By 40, I wasn't just known. I was obeyed. When the last of the old kingdoms collapsed after years of infighting and betrayal, people looked for something stable. They chose me, not because I forced them, but because I'd been building the future while they were all feasting on the past. They called it the quiet shift. When the kingdoms began to fall, it didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a grand battle or some fiery rebellion. It was slower. Like rot. The rivers changed course. Crops failed. Nobles started raising taxes on people who had nothing left to give. Riots broke out in cities that hadn't seen blood on cobblestones in generations. Old banners were burned. Palaces locked their doors. While the world my uncle once ruled crumbled, I stepped in not with soldiers, but with scrolls and seals. I created the Council of Reach in Harriston, a port city nobody cared about before it became the heart of our movement. I made sure every village had a voice. Every law was written down, debated, and signed by hands that knew dirt, not just ink. I wasn't crowned. I was chosen. Not in one day, but over years. 100 towns, then 200. Then thousands of people who no longer bowed to kings, but to something they could shape with their own hands. But power attracts danger. That's when Edwin returned. My cousin. The same one who bragged about commanding a garrison at that feast years ago. He had vanished after a failed rebellion in the east. Everyone assumed he was dead. He wasn't. He'd spent years gathering exiled nobles, mercenaries, and old knights who couldn't accept the world was changing. They called themselves the Old Flame. They believed the kingdoms could be reborn. And they blamed me for everything. Edwin declared me a traitor. Said I'd poisoned the minds of commoners and stolen the realm's spine. He sent letters to every known city-state I'd worked with, calling me a heretic in disguise, a false leader, a usurper in scholars' robes. He put a price on my head. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was war. Just not the kind they were used to. We didn't fight in fields. We fought in the courts, in councils, in the streets through ideas. But Edwin, he didn't care about the law. He burned down the records of 2 districts before we could stop him. He captured one of my advisors and hanged him in front of a tribunal house. And the worst part? People started listening to him. Not because he was right, but because fear is easier to follow than change. That's when I had to decide something I never thought I would. I'd spent years building this new world without violence. But I was done watching my people get slaughtered for it. So I formed the Memory Guard. Not soldiers. Not exactly. These were people trained to protect the archives, the councils, the voting halls. Teachers, translators, builders, anyone who had shaped this new system with their hands or minds. They carried no banners. Only iron rings on their fingers, each marked with the name of the district they served. We fought back not with swords first, but with arrests, trials, and truth. We caught Edwin's spies. We exposed his letters. We marched to cities where his men had taken hold, and reminded them that fear burns fast but fades faster. But still the damage grew. My advisors wanted me to strike him down. Make an example, they said. He's a cancer. But he was my cousin. And that was the first time I truly hated what this journey had done to me. I finally agreed to meet Edwin. Not in secret. Not in shadow. In front of the people. We held the summit of Taro Hill, a neutral ground that had once been a war fort, now turned into a learning hall. I demanded it be public. No daggers in the dark. No whispered threats. Just truth spoken aloud, where anyone could judge us both. He arrived late, of course. Wearing red, the color of the old flames, the dead kingdoms. He hadn't changed much. Still broad-shouldered. Still smug. But his eyes had gone colder. Sharper. He walked in like a man who thought he still owned the room. "Cousin," he said, smiling like it meant something. "You've done well for a librarian." I looked him in the eye and said, "Better than you did as a commander." The people laughed. Not all of them, but enough. He made his pitch. Claimed I had broken the realm. Said I replaced noble honor with chaos. That I ruled from behind words, not blood. That I made the people forget who they were. I let him talk. Then I stood up and read aloud from the laws our council had written. Laws that protected widows from losing land. That freed debt workers after 7 years. That punished abuse from noble or commoner alike. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just reminded them what we'd built. He spat on the ground and called it weakness. Then he pulled out a scroll. A blood pact. Signed by 7 lords still hiding in the old hills. Their seals were real. One of them was my uncle's. "Richard's last words weren't about you," Edwin said, raising the scroll. "He begged for the realm. And we will restore it." I walked to him slowly, took the scroll and read it aloud. Then I burned it. Right there. In front of everyone. Flames licked the old parchment as I spoke. No crown forged in blood will rule again. That act shattered something. Not in him but in the people watching. The summit ended in chaos. Some cheered. Others marched out with their fists raised in anger. I knew then Edwin wouldn't stop. And worse, he wouldn't fall quietly. 3 weeks later someone tried to kill me. Not on the road. Not in battle. In my home. They poisoned the ink in my council chamber. It was meant for my hands. Meant to kill slowly. But I wasn't the one who opened the scroll. It was my scribe Lyra. 17 years old. Sharp as a blade. She died that night. And something inside me cracked. I went to the archives alone. I looked through every old document we'd saved from the collapsing kingdoms. Every oath, every decree. Then I found it. An old charter. Written long before my uncle ruled. Before Edwin. Before any of us. It was a clause, a forgotten one, that allowed a sitting council chair to name a perpetual protector in times of unrest. Not a ruler. A steward. With limited power. But full authority to act without consensus when safety was threatened. I took it to the council. They voted. The result was unanimous. They named me protector. Not a queen. But something older. Something harder to unseat. After I was named protector, I stopped being just a symbol. I became a line people would not cross. The memory guard grew. New recruits, not warriors, but people who believed in the law more than in any sword. For every town Edwin tried to turn, we built one stronger, with clearer justice, tighter bonds. He started losing ground not just in territory but in belief. And then came his biggest mistake. He marched on Hairston, the city that had become our heart. The place where the first council met. Where the laws were written in dozens of languages, taught in schools, shared in marketplaces. He thought if he could burn it, he could break us. He came with 500 men, old banners flying. Fire wagons. Battering carts. It wasn't a siege. It was meant to be a warning to the world. That the old blood still had claws. But Hairston wasn't like the old cities. The people didn't wait for soldiers to save them. They filled the streets. Formed human walls around the archive towers. Smiths handed out hammers. Bakers passed out bread and water to the defenders. Teachers read laws through the windows, so the children would hear what they were protecting. The memory guard met Edwin's army outside the east wall. They didn't have the numbers, but they had something else. They had me. I walked into the battlefield alone. No armor. Just a plain robe and the sealed copy of our foundational laws hanging around my neck. Edwin rode forward, sneering. Still hiding behind words, cousin? No, I said. I am the word. He raised his sword. And I raised my hand. Behind me, over 300 townsfolk marched onto the field. None of them armed. Just walking. Standing. Witnesses. He hesitated. That's when the river burst. What Edwin didn't know was that while he prepared his attack, we had spent months quietly changing the land. Engineers had diverted water to weaken the soil under the old road leading to Hairston. The entire path turned to mud under his cavalry. Horses screamed. Wagons sank. Men shouted in panic. His army broke in less than 10 minutes. He tried to retreat, but the people didn't chase. They surrounded. Edwin was captured. Not killed. Not then. I made sure he stood trial. In the very hall he once laughed in. The same kind of room where I'd once been mocked as a girl with too many dreams. He stood silent as the charges were read. Incitement, sabotage, murder of innocents, treason against the new law. He had nothing to say. Not until I asked him one question. Do you still think I cannot shape a crown? His eyes burned. You didn't shape a crown, he said. You erased a history. No. Irraplia. I remembered who we could be. He was sentenced to exile. But on the way to the border, his escort was ambushed. No one survived. To this day, no one knows who did it. Or at least, no one will say. Some claim it was old loyalists. Others say it was townsfolk who lost family in his raids. And some believe it was me. Maybe it was. Maybe I made one mistake. Maybe the woman who refused to rule by blood let one drop stain her hands. But the truth is this. The kingdoms they knew are gone. What we built wasn't perfect, but it was chosen by the people, for the people, and it endures not through war, but through law, memory, and the immortality of dreams that refuse to die. My uncle's name is a footnote in a forgotten ledger. Mine is carved into every courthouse wall, every shared archive, every voice that rises to speak truth to power. They mocked me once. Now my banner flies silent, steady over a world they never imagined, and it will never come down. Not while one voice still remembers what it cost to raise it.